up first.
Yes, ma'am. I believe you are.
Okay.
Susan.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Susan Rudy. I am the president of the Northern Association. I belong to the Brush Valley Fusion of Faith, which is a teeny tiny church in a teeny tiny town. We're about 25 miles southeast of Penn State University. And that's pretty much it. And everybody knows that this is being recorded and it will be available on the Penn Central Conference website.
Yes.
All right. Let's see what else. Okay. Opening prayer. I sat in on a webinar last Tuesday, and one of the presenters gave this prayer, and I just thought it was pretty neat. So here we go. Good and gracious God, let us breathe in the presence of the Spirit as we come to God in prayer. Good and gracious God, we come together in a spirit of union to lean into our future walk together. May this time be filled with grace and discernment as we uncover what comes next for us and unpack the feelings surrounding that. Help us be mindful of our mutual care for each other. Help us keep a spirit of collaboration. And we raise our hearts in thanks for those gathered and scattered and those who lead us today. And for the gifts you so generously provide each of us this day and always. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Susan.
That was beautiful, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
All right. Okay. So Amelia, do you want to introduce yourself? Give your credentials and what have you?
I think I can do that. Thank you so very much. Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Amelia Price. I serve with the good people at St. Paul's Verdilla, which is a very teeny tiny little church on Produce Road in southern-ish Snyder County. I will be there 8 years come fall. I was formerly a Presbyterian commissioned lay pastor, was a licensed minister for many, many years before being ordained 8 years ago this fall.
Right.
All of my churches have been what the statistics call a star church, a small town and rural church. So as I finish that part out, I'm going to share my screen. I have a few slides, hopefully will hold our interest this night. I just want the disclaimer to be, I am not an expert. I am a small town pastor who has lived this reality. And by the work of a God with a wild imagination, I ended up co-chairing the Star Coalition. So my first engagement for everybody, what does rural mean to you? Please just shout out. Don't worry about raising your hand. Just be sure you unmute. What does rural mean to you?
Country.
Country, yeah.
Country?
Yeah.
Okay, what else?
Farm community.
Farm community, farm, what else?
Tight-knit.
Scenic.
Say again?
Scenic.
Scenic, okay.
Yeah.
Tammy?
Small.
Small, okay, all right.
Tight-knit.
Tight-knit, okay.
Distance.
Distance, say more. Say more
Pardon?
about distance.
Distance from main, like larger towns, and sometimes distance from each other. Sometimes one church will take on quite a bit of area, especially denomination wise.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You know, I mean, I have people from Ellisburg, from Schuylkill County, from local Shamokin, kind of
Wow.
all over.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Others.
Home. Home.
Home. Okay, here's my first disclaimer of the night. I am a transplant. So my experience of rural, at least at first, was, who are you and why are you here? But I learned that these communities are self-contained and are very, very close-knit. And that close-knit asks you to earn your place. And then when I married somebody that was believed to be local, I really had an in. So that was awfully nice. What else does rural mean? What about
Sometimes
things? Go ahead.
Sometimes I think of rural as independent, kind of not freewheeling, but more free thinking, more, less organized in some ways.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Well, let's take it another step.
I have one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Not connecting well with the greater church.
That is also true. Kind of feel a lot of bit isolated, a little bit left out. Go ahead, Janice.
I was just gonna say sometimes they feel alienated.
Any of the pastors on the screen ever try to use Worship Ways without editing it, like within an inch of its life? Uh-huh. Yeah.
Always at it.
So a bit disconnected, maybe? Well, let's go to the next slide and say this one. What is a small town? What do you think a small town is?
Right now.
Middle of nowhere.
Middle of nowhere, okay? What else?
Under 5,000.
Under 5,000. Okay, hold on to that thought.
In my case, it's half Amish and half English.
Okay, it's probably 2/3, 1/3 Mennonite and English here where I am. In fact, my church has Produce Road on one side and Mennonite farms on all of the three. And their fields. I think they planted soybean this year. Others, what else is a small town? Go ahead, Alice, shout it out.
I think it used to mean self-contained, but not so much anymore.
No. Somewhat energetic and alive, but there's not a lot of jobs. They're close knit, but there's not, in some cases anyway, not opportunities because the industries are moving out. All of those, go ahead.
Everybody knows everybody's business.
For the positive and the negative, absolutely.
Very clicky.
And that connection comes from a place, and we will talk about that as we keep going. I want to share this picture because it fascinates me. Can you see that? That picture was taken in 1890 in a when Stockholm was a small town in Sweden. That is a telephone tower. The city of Sweden devised that mammoth 5,500 telephone line monstrosity to meet the needs of the people who lived there at that time. For me, this picture exemplifies what a lot of our small town and rural churches do. They make it work. No matter how much of a monstrosity they have to build and maintain. I love that picture. It really gets me. What are the things that we face in our churches? Some of you have mentioned them. Let's talk about a few more. Do we all have a lot of kids and a lot of grandkids running around? Do we have a lot of people under 40 running around?
No.
But we make do with who we have, don't we? Tell me about the kinds of ministries that we have in our churches. What's on this screen? We have a praying church. We are a prayer list guided church. What have you got going on in your churches? Shout it out.
The Northern Association is going to do emergency buckets for our project this year, our service project.
For Church World Service?
No, the other
No,
one.
the other one. Okay, good. Good. What else have we got going on?
We're now taking snacks to some nursing homes because it seems like some of them are not providing adequate snacks. And
Oh,
so
wow.
we just started that. The snacks are guided by what employees tell us they need.
Okay, so
So
you're engaging and that's good.
yeah, but I mean we're very elderly and we're serving our brothers and sisters who are elderly, you know.
Absolutely. Emily, go ahead.
We have our own prayer chain for our church. We also donate to the local food closet and clothing closet. We try to do some outreach in the Harrisburg area. We volunteer at Caitlin Smiles and at Bethesda Mission. So do some outreach programs.
Very good. You use the opportunities you have with you. Others?
The fourth Thursday of the month, we have a senior community luncheon. There is nothing for the seniors, which is the majority in our community. And we usually get between 30 and 50 seniors come to eat, and they stay and they socialize and might play games. And even though I have very few children, they're mostly grandkids of our parishioners. We will have, this is the third year I'm hosting Bible school. And so far, I think I have between 8 and 12 children coming. So that's quite the blessing.
Well, you will hear this more than one time this night. One of the assumptions about small town and rural churches is that we are dying, that we are not energetic, and that we need help. We do need help. We need resources. We need to be heard. We need to be recognized. But all of the things that you said, and I know that there are other things on this screen, all of those things said to me that we meet our community where they are. And we try to assist our communities to the best of our ability, despite age, despite location, despite some of the things that on the surface might seem like hindrances. Now, this, I won't go too far with this one, but this is a wonderful book. The statistical book that the UCC puts out every year is full of fascinating information. It's especially good if you're having trouble sleeping. There are some good articles in it. I don't want to make light of it. But Larry, you said about a small town is under 5,000 people?
Yeah. Yes, I did.
This is a fascinating little graph from the 22 statistical book. If you can see the colors clearly, in 2022, 64.4% of UCC congregations and communities were under 25,000. Between 25,000 and 300,000 is another 25%. You can read the 300,000 to 1 million, and there's actually a place with more than 1 million. I hardly believe that. But look at this next one. This is again 2022. In 2022, we had 4,603 congregations. That number is lower today. But look at the number of people in the Midwest region where we are. 142,776. We are the major part of the United Church of Christ. This next one confirms that 11.9% of the churches in the United Church of Christ are in Pennsylvania. And membership is 13.6%. But this next one's the one that I want to show you. Congregations in membership size, 25% of churches in 2021 are 1 to 50 members. In 2011, it was only 17.9. Look at the way these numbers have shifted. The membership in the United Church of Christ is shifting by age, and it is shifting to smaller churches. 64.4% of the churches in the United Church of Christ are considered small churches, and that's what this one shows us. By congregation size. Say again? I didn't catch who that was or what you said. Try again.
It was just a clearing of a throat.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. This is an incredible statistic, if you ask me. And the fact that churches are becoming smaller and the smaller churches are becoming the larger percentage of the church says that our church is fundamentally changing. What is a star congregation? 64.4% of all UCC congregations can be found in communities of less than 25,000. Most of those communities are significantly smaller. 5,000 would be considered a large community. Many of them are 500 and less. One of the things that's sort of represented on this screen, but is much more prominent in the Midwest, is that many of our communities are agriculture centered. So the land, agriculture, livestock, that type of thing. So a different calendar of the seasons. My church is very much in that particular place. And you alluded to this one, low population density. There's a long distance between houses. There's a long distance between churches. And when you have a church like mine that literally sits in a farmer's field, who's your neighbor? Who's your neighbor? What do
The
you think?
cows.
The cows, yes. I have yet to have one come into church, but I'll tell you a story about a cow later on. How do you think about who your neighbor is when you're not looking at a building or a house next to you? Kathy, where'd you go, Kathy?
Here I am.
You talked about having
Oh.
people from all over.
Am I there?
Yep, you're there. Your camera's popping
Okay.
in.
Yeah. Well, I think the neighbor is largely in my church dependent on familial relationships
Mhm.
and also like minds. We have, as you would know, I'm sure, we have people who were coal miners or worked in mining related
Yep.
areas, and that kind of like-mindedness really pulls us together, as well as the familial lines. And I think the whole coal culture, COAL culture, also it's somewhere where people in coal country have low self-esteem, as I know you know, and they're more comfortable with people who can talk the same language, use the same kind of terminology and the same experiences. Being underground, for example, is a unique thing that people share. I have people in my congregation who were mine inspectors, some were miners, some were haulers, and still are coal haulers. So sorry, I live on a main road. So that I think is how we connect each other.
Well, and please tell people where you're located, where your church is located.
My church is outside of Shamokin, and that is very coal centered. And we are not far. We're probably, maybe maybe 2-3 miles from Schuylkill County line. And we're very, very in the mountains. If you look out of the front church door, you run into a mountain. There's a lot of mountainous areas and empty. They're just full of trees and no people. You know,
These
the
churches
people.
were. Go ahead.
No, the people just live in the valley. You know, the mountains are not populated.
And these churches were planted in some cases, 200 more years ago.
Yeah.
Communities that are at least in our general vicinity, for communities that are very different than when they were founded. So that's also a piece of this. The Star Coalition exists because at the General Synod in 2021, a few people who were in judicatory work and small town pastors got together to share hopes and frustrations, to share dreams and anger that 64% of our church isn't represented. It's not represented well in resources. It's not represented well in assumptions. And it's hard to find pastors for some of these churches. So the coalition was formed to begin to give voice to churches like we represent. The spirit of the Star Coalition is lifting these voices, lifting the stories of grit and constancy and the good side of everybody knowing everybody else, recognizing that there's another side to that as well. But mostly to say, our churches are dynamic. We are not dying. We may be small, but we are doing God's work in the places that we are planted. And we have something to give to the national church. The ministry that I have found in small churches is unlike anything that I grew up with. And I was in a variety of churches when I was a kid. But ministering in small communities, I learned a lot about family, about connection. I learned a lot about cows, Alice, at one Christmas where I was asked to baptize a brand new baby calf. You're not trained ever to do that. I don't care where your training comes from. But the farmer had brought this hours old creature on a very cold late December, right before Christmas night. And it was the first bull calf that had been born on his farm that entire year. So asking me to bless this little creature, I've never forgotten it. That's probably 18 years ago now. But that's the kind of thing that happens. You're rolled into the important things of the communal life, not really recognizing how important it is until you stop and think about those kinds of things. Many, many of our churches have far fewer than 100 members. A 100-member church anymore is a big church. But it's the connections. That's what holds us together. We've talked about a lot of these. We meet the needs around us, what neighbor looks like. Farms are farther apart than apartment buildings. I emphasize this one because when we talk about outreach and going into our community and knocking on doors, when you're in areas like we are, that means a lot of driving. That means a lot, Kathleen, I think, said about going into the hollers, because that's where people are living. But the communal and familial relationships are very, very deep. And neighbors need each other in different ways. Anybody ever get stuck in the snow before the days of cell phones? Uh-huh. What did you hope for besides not freezing to death? That some good Samaritan would come along, maybe with a tractor?
At least a shovel.
At least a shovel, yeah, maybe with a little cat litter or sand or something, yeah. The story that I've heard that's connected to that one is two farmers who, Emily, go ahead, I'll tell my story in a minute.
That actually kind of happened to me back in 2024. I was sharing a message at church, and I was running to church and used one of the back roads, and it had snowed, and I got stuck in the road and couldn't move. And luckily, thank God, there was somebody that was near the area that actually got me out. And I learned very quickly not to use some of the back roads and use some of the more major highways in our area.
Especially when it snows, right?
Yes.
Ronette shared in our chat, small but full of spirit, resources are needed. You are so right, Ronette. I buried a Volkswagen in a snowbank, a little old Beetle. And if it wasn't for a John Deere tractor, it would have been ugly. Our coalition is a very diverse group of people. And I want to give a little bit of plug to two of the people who will be with us next Tuesday. Douglas Dunlap and Susan Craig have just written and published a book called A Little One Shall Lead. And next Tuesday, the 12th, at our regular coalition meeting, Doug and Susan will be talking about their book. The Zoom link is here. I will be sending these slides to Paul for him to send around, and that will be a clickable link. If you're interested, join us. The book is an excellent discussion of small town and rural churches. Star Coalition is still forming. Okay, I'm sorry, Emily, how does rural Pennsylvania say I love you? Watch for deer, yes. Very good, yes. Call me when you get home. That 64.4% statistic represents all of the churches that we serve, that we attend, that we enjoy. The Star Coalition wants to raise up the energy and the creativity and the talent that are connected to these churches, to share with a denomination that is talking about being in need of money, not having enough pastors, not having enough resources even at the national setting, which is some of the reason we don't have a lot of resources at the settings that we are at. The wisdom that we bring, each of us, from the places where we worship or serve, can help our larger church to be even more than it is. Because these ministries are unique. And if you have never had the opportunity to live in a small town and to be accepted in a small town, it's going to be a very different experience. And most importantly, remind the church that these are vital and loving and caring and powerful churches. Now, are there any questions, any comments, any thoughts?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm wondering, because I was just listening to what you were saying about the even the national church doesn't have the adequate resources. So in this coalition, the Star Coalition, is there a place that they could develop a website that has these resources on it? Or, I mean, and we can even, because we are partnered with the Presbyterians and the Lutherans, why couldn't we all use, you know, the same resources? They're not very much different from ours. Liturgy, maybe, some wording, some, you know, just little things, but you can tweak it.
Absolutely.
So is there a place that we could develop or go to, you know, to pull that in?
There is. We are developing a Google Drive, which we will provide moderated access to keep the material that's in it safe. We are working with the Damascus Project out of Wisconsin and Minnesota, who is a clearinghouse and creates as well as stores and disseminates resources. There are a few other organizations, one of which is in the Presbyterian Church, one is in the Lutheran Church, that we have been in talks with to share and to create resources that will fit in all of our different settings. I'm thinking of a tiny church in Montana. They have been without any outside leadership for a period of years. And there is a Lutheran pastor in that synod. I don't know actually geographically how close they are. But this little church that I'm thinking about that hasn't had leadership is not unique. And this Lutheran pastor has covenanted to write a sermon each week that they post on their website, so that some of these little churches can go to the website, pull it down, and somebody will read a theologically sound, well-crafted teaching sermon. And that's just one extraordinary option that we're thinking of. And as these things are settled and taken care of, we've just begun work with the Damascus Project. These things will be coming out at this point, probably later in the year or after the new year.
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea. I know that we have 4 churches in the little town that I pastor in, and The Lutheran Church has been really having, as you know, a really hard time finding a pastor. Imagine that. And so we're not alone, UCCers. But so I've been going over and consecrating the elements for them so that they are able to do that. But it's just nice because of that, we have developed this really close relationship, closer than we've ever been in the whole 17 years I've been there. But that it would be a nice thing for the Star Coalition to also have, because we can become, you know, sister churches that we're supposed to be, and really help each other to, you know, embrace these resource issues, or even perhaps maybe supply issues, whatever. But we have that core that we can go to and say, hey, you know, our church is really struggling with, we don't have the money or we don't have the resources for Bible school. Does anybody have anything out there? And then we share. I mean, I think that's what we're supposed to do.
I think you're absolutely right. And when you think about these smaller churches who pride themselves, somebody said right at the beginning, being independent and self-sufficient. What better way to be self-sufficient than to share the resources that we have in our communities? Alice has an excellent point. The United Methodist Church has some good resources for rural life as well, as do the Presbyterians, and not as much. It's a slightly different emphasis in the Lutheran Church. And that's true. A lot of these congregations, the Methodists and the Lutherans, were joined early on in our lifespan. So thank you for pointing that out, Alice. I do have some resources for us. Thank you, Ronette. You didn't know that you were going to be my segue, so thank you for that. Come this July, about a month from Wednesday, the United Church of Christ is going to vote on the Star Coalition resolution, which asks for a seat at the table for the Star Coalition. In an adjacent endeavor, the national setting did do an event called A Tent of Our Own Making. There is an article at this link that talks about an intentional gathering at the national setting of rural leaders from around the country. It also gives us the Star Facebook page. If you all are interested, please visit that and I will let you in. And there are some excellent resources there as well. And this is a shameless plug for the book for Tuesday, but this is the cover. And I just got mine and it's fascinating. So if you're looking to buy yourself a gift, there's a nice one. This is some of the stuff that I wanted to talk to us about. There is a lot of work happening under the umbrella of supporting rural churches. These particular organizations sponsor some events throughout the year. Most of them are available hybrid. Some continue to be strictly in person. I want to point out the first one, the Wartburg Seminary. Again, Ronette, you were prescient on what we're talking about. The Wartburg Seminary is a Lutheran seminary in Iowa, and they have been doing a rural ministry conference for decades. It usually is in the spring. It is open to lay as well as authorized leaders. You will be receiving these slides, so you don't have to worry about trying to copy them down. But I encourage you to attend some of these events because it reminds us that we are not alone. And in many parts of the country, churches are dealing with exactly the same kinds of things that we are. The Castle Project is under the Wartburg Seminary as well. It is an intentional resourcing piece of the work that they do. The International Rural Church Association is a new one. I wasn't particularly familiar with that one, but if you go to the website, they are doing some cutting edge work. Faith and Lead Ministries in Small Towns and Communities has some good resources on it as well. Of course, you have the Star Facebook page. And the Center for Rural Pennsylvania is not a religious or religion-based site. It is a Commonwealth site, but it recognizes and discusses some of the challenges of rural communities. The distinctive thing that we have to think about, the rural church is embedded in its community. And what happens in the community affects the church. What happens in the church affects the community. As a small town pastor, even though I don't really have a community around me, there is a community that has built itself around the church. Some of them are members of the church, and some of them aren't. But they still look to Verdilla when they have need, when there's a death, when you need pastoral counseling, when there's an incident at the school. The church becomes the center of the community and the center of the outreach in a way in small towns that it really can't as well in the bigger communities. I am not saying that larger churches do not do that. They do that in very particular ways. I'm talking about the different ways that rural churches meet the needs around them. Bob puts in the chat, FYI, the Lilly Endowment is now doing some significant grant making to strengthen churches in small towns and rural areas. That is absolutely accurate, Bob. One of the challenges of living in a small town is finding grant writers. And that's not a challenge to what you put into the chat. There is help out there in some very unique ways. Questions, comments before we keep going? Is this resonating with your experience in the churches that you serve? Or do you have different experiences that would expand our conversation? Okay. Some more resources for us. These are some books that I have found very useful. Some of these we have looked at in the Rural Coalition. Some of us have used them for various things. This one is one of the older ones, The Fresh Expressions of Rural Churches. This book attempts to show the vibrancy and the realities of small town ministry. There's no sugarcoating, but it talks about the uniqueness of ministry in our settings. It talks about getting integrated into the community as an outsider. One of the first services I did for, I think it was Mother's Day for Verdilla, we were talking about family and where families were. And for some reason, we got into where people were born. I discovered on that Sunday that I was the only person, and that Sunday we had about 35 people. I was the only person in that 35 people who was not born in Pennsylvania. Many of them continued to live in the homes that their families had come from. Or the children had moved into their grandparents' homes and could tell me right where their grandparents had sat in the church at the time. These are unique, both joyful and grief-filled pieces of small town living. This book talks about them in great detail. This is one that will challenge us. Stanton talks about building thriving communities in thriving churches in rural communities. This one is a little bit more academic, but he talks about reclaiming the good parts of everybody knowing everybody, of caring for each other. He talks in this book about how rural communities have learned to live together to meet the needs. For those of you who live in a little bit bigger towns, remember that in some of these places, the only police department we have is the state police. In some of our communities, we don't have fire companies. And in some cases, fire companies have to come 15, 20 miles before they can reach a building on fire. My congregation absolutely believes it would no longer exist if it was not for the Mennonite farmer that lives behind us that found the fire in our bell tower and ran to his phone shack to call 911 for us. Generally, the Mennonite community does not come into our church, but they came in and they helped them pull out important things before the fire company could come. They got the hose and were watering down the bell tower so the bell tower didn't fall down. and the bell didn't fall down into the annex, into the ante area below it. It was a fascinating day. I was not the pastor of the church in that time, but it was more than 20 years ago, and it is a formative event in the life of that church. Questions, comments? I saw the heads going. I know you've got similar stories.
Well, I know I can relate. What you said earlier, I would imagine if we were to ask in our church how many people are not from the area, my family would be one of the very few that is not from this area. And you know, you make a lot of progress when somebody asks, well, how long have you lived here? And you answer and said, well, you lived here a long time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Finally made it.
Jan, did you have your hand up?
No, but I can emulate with that, you know, people are, it is tight knit. And in my congregation, we visit one of our parishioners and I've called to care and we go to visit him. And the one lady that I visit with, she grew up in the house where we go. And so they always share stories and, you know, where they went to school there in town, which is now a museum, you know, it used to be the second floor. So they all have these stories and it's just fascinating to me. I mean, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, so people helping people is huge.
Well, and the story's been, yes, Emily.
Or I know getting directions from people, you know, directions you get. Go to this place. It used to be a church, but it's not a church anymore. Or it used to be a store. It's not there anymore. It burned down. It's just like, that's not helpful if you're not from the area.
But it's interesting in that I resonate with that. And the other one I tell people is don't trust your GPS around here because there's no service. And they look at me funny, but that is also a very real reality of many of our churches. In a cell phone, there is a radio for the actual phone call, and there is a different radio that uses a different frequency for the text messages. Generally, a text message should go through no matter what. When I am standing in my church, I cannot send a text message. I cannot receive a call. When there is some cloud cover, there is a little 12 by 12 area that if I stand just right and I don't move too much, I can get a text message to go out. That is a reality in these communities. And take it back a little bit. Zoom for meetings like we're doing tonight. Zoom for homework assignments for kids in school. Anybody ever hear of telehealth? Or video doctor appointments? When was the last time you actually mailed a piece of paper to the state or the federal government? Our lives are becoming digital. And if you do not have the ability to connect, it is a justice issue. It is a safety issue. And some of it's geography, but some of it is political. And a lot of these small towns simply do not have the concentration of people to warrant the lines being extended to meet those towns. But we are on Zoom tonight.
Amelia, the other thing that I find is a lot of it is age. Our people during pandemic, we were going to have a Zoom get together just to see each other's face. And a lot of them don't have internet. They don't have, they wouldn't know what to do even if they did. They don't send text messages. I have one lady, she keeps her cell phone in her car because it's just for emergency. So, you know, there is another issue with an aging congregation that doesn't know how to use or doesn't want to use technology.
There is a segment that does not want to. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Well, that's my experience too, that we have a number of people who just, I don't know if they fear it, they disapprove of it somehow, and they lack the desire to learn the new technology. It's overwhelming to some people.
It is like a different language.
Yeah. There's another piece I wanted to mention, but I'm not sure if it's appropriate at the time, but is the patriotism issue. These small congregations I have found have incredible histories of public service and armed service people. And I think that's a piece that also binds us together, because you can go in any church in the valley, the valley where we live, where I live, or where I work, and just find generations of people, and still today, young people who are enlisted because it's what we do. It's the so I think that's another piece that can bind us together, and it's a different way of thinking, I think, than most city type of attitudes.
Urban attitudes. I don't have the exact figures, but the last time I read figures of recruitment numbers and where recruits were coming from for what do we have now, 6 armed services, more than half come from small communities. And
that's significant.
3/4 are from families that have prior service in very close generations. So yes, and take that a step further. We have an all-volunteer force. So the losses from smaller communities per capita are higher. So that creates a very different dynamic in small communities as well. And it requires pastors who come in from the outside to recognize those uniquenesses and honor them in appropriate ways.
Absolutely.
So that.
And
Tammy Gessner, go ahead, I'm sorry.
How many of us in our small churches wanted to move the American flag and the Christian flag and had that conversation? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's important to meet people where they are. And one of the dances that pastors do is trying to figure out when and how to push back. And sometimes the best thing to do is listen. And when the relationship has been built, then we can have a different conversation. Tammy Gessner put into the chat, Embracing God's Future Without Forgetting the Past by Michael K. Girlinghouse. Say more, Tammy Gessner.
Well, actually, this is a book that we had talked about in Rural Coalition meetings, our monthly meetings that we have. And it's a book, it's a conversation about loss, grief, and nostalgia in congregational life. If you don't do that type of grieving first, you won't move on. You're going to stay and live in that grief.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And do you find in some small towns it's very hard to do grief work? We grieve by doing. We grieve by moving on. There can be much more said about that. Others, questions, comments before we go on? I see a hand. Emily.
And like you said about grief, there are people in the community in our area who just, they don't deal with grief. It's the mentality you have to be strong about everything, and they stuff it all down. It's really sad to see sometimes.
Sometimes it is. And that's not unique to small towns. Grief is difficult, and it's a vulnerable place. And Western Christians don't like to be vulnerable. Tammy, go ahead.
No, and because it's cultural, I wanted to say, they don't even recognize that they are grieving.
Precisely.
Before I moved to Shamokin, someone, another pastor who served as a leader at Geisinger Chaplains, with Steve, some of you know him, made a remark about Shamokin, and the saying is, what can you do? Something bad happens, and the response is, what can you do? And I thought that was kind of funny at first, but it's actually true. A very bad thing can happen, And the response is, what can you do? Well, such and such died, or we had suicide in our community, and it was tragic and horrible. And what can you do? And that stops the conversation. It's very difficult to move on from what can you do, you know, and that I think that's part of this, what they grew up with, because there was so much tragedy in the early days in coal mining. I know in my own family, even people were blown up because they were dynamiters. And what can you do? You have to go on. So it's kind of a coping mechanism that shuts down everything.
Kathy, I'm going to ask you a question. Did we talk at all before this event?
What do you mean? Did you and I talk?
Yep.
No, not really. I mean, I've talked to you on occasion, but we haven't talked about this.
See my next slide? Practicing care in rural communities and congregations. Thank you for being my segue. That is precise, and we didn't plan this with either Ronette or
not at
Kathy.
all.
That's what I
No,
was
not
getting
at all.
at.
Nope.
This book talks about that, about the listening skills that pastors and lay leaders need to meet congregations and people where they are. Because if you've got a culture where you don't do grief, if you've got a culture where you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you will shut people down by practicing pastoral care in a way that they cannot receive it. This book is very, very good. It is a little bit dated, but it is a fascinating treatise on what we have been talking about. And the most important thing, and we've talked about this before, is listening. As a transplant, I don't have any relation here except my son, who is in Milton, which is a whole nother world from Verdilla. But the family connections are close in our valley. And I found, especially as I was learning to be Mike Price's wife and come into this world, you get to know people's families. And you do that by saying, okay, who's your mother? Or who's your father? Or what's your mother's maiden name? And it is amazing how people will talk about the connections because somebody cared enough to ask, to be curious. And I at first I thought, oh, that's being nosy and sticking my nose into somebody else's business. It is absolutely not. It is absolutely not. Because it is a way of connecting with the foundational unit that these people bring. And it's fascinating the things you learn if you just stop and listen. The other one was a book that I wanted to put in. I refused to serve a dying congregation. And one of the things that book talks about when a pastor comes to a new church is not to change anything for the first year. You listen, you watch, you ask questions, you meet people. You get to know the place where you are now. And after a year, several things have happened. They've gotten to know you. You've been able to have these conversations about who's connected to who and who's not connected anymore and why, what's happened in the community and what effect has that had on the church. It's very, very hard because we're trained to challenge the churches that we serve as pastors. And those of you who are members of churches, you've experienced that, I'm sure. Sometimes the best way to challenge somebody is to get them to talk to you and tell you what's important or tell you what they don't want to talk about and earn the trust so that the conversations can happen when they're needed. Questions or comments or curiosities? Yes, ma'am. Alice.
So I'm sitting here pondering because some of this is true no matter where we are.
Precisely.
And I'm trying to put my hands around the flavor that is uniquely rural and small town in that conversation. And I still haven't quite quite grabbed it yet, but there are some things, you know, listen first. You can't, Sally Dries always says you can't change them. You have to love them before you can change them. And,
Precisely.
you know, those kinds of things. So, you know, all of that is true no matter where we are. You know, and I know we've talked about the family connections and the patriotism and the relationship to the land. Maybe I just need to read the book, but there's something that is underneath all of that that's uniquely flavored by rural small town pastoral care. And I'm not sure what it is.
I have something that may help you with that. When I did some work in Appalachia with Cora, Committee on Religion in Appalachia Committee. It's now defunct. But years ago, I did some work with Cora, and people said Appalachian people are connected to the dirt, It's the actual dirt where they're from. They have a connection to it that is kind of unique. And I think as I thought about that a lot, it seemed to make sense. My people are very much connected to dirt, and the dirt is sometimes coal dirt. When I've served in rural congregations and farming communities, it's been the dirt that they plant. And it's just there's some unique connection that people from towns, larger towns and cities, urban areas do not have. There's this, we crave, Appalachian people like myself crave the home dirt. I'll give you an example. I recently bought a burial plot in my family's home church, which is nowhere, it's not real far, but it's not where I live. But I needed to know that I was going to be reconnected with that family farm dirt. Does that make any sense to you, or does that help you? It's a weird Appalachian concept, I think.
Yeah, I'm
But
not
it's true.
sure. I observed this. I grew up in Philadelphia, so you know, and I've been here almost 27 years. So I do feel like I'm here, you know, but there's
Mhm.
still certain things that you know, when you talk about the dirt, I think about
Someone,
cemeteries, for example.
s- someone once told me this story, a person, that they felt that the DNA of their family was literally in the dirt, that their family had worked this farm so many years and so many things had happened, and they had livestock born and plants grown, and they walked the fields behind horses in the early days, and that they were literally connected by DNA to that dirt, and so they couldn't leave it, and they had to come home to it. I know it's kind of a weird concept, but I think it might be true.
When I married my husband, I obviously did not stay in the house that I had purchased. But when I moved to Snyder County, I brought dirt from the home that I purchased after I was divorced before he and I were married. It's
I
real.
get that. Yep, I get that.
It's, Alice, I appreciate you raising it, because this is something that I've struggled with, being a transplant here and not growing up in farm communities and rural communities. I grew up on Air Force bases. I lived outside DC and Seattle and Washington, DC and Lexington, Kentucky. I lived in urban areas. And there is so much that is the same. Humans are humans. But in this area, I find a different kind of connection. And frankly, when I moved here at first, I was not welcome. I was an outsider with no connection whatsoever to the valley. So I experienced the more negative engagement. So I've seen it from both sides. The one thing that we're trying to say in the Rural Coalition is that it's not an us and a them. It's not, big cities and little cities and somehow we're in friction with each other. Just recognizing the uniquenesses of both of those places and the things that connect us, as well as the things that are unique to both settings. And many of the things that we talked about, resourcing, engagement, really thinking through who your neighbor is and what your neighbor needs. Those are things that would apply no matter what your setting is. And it's not just for the people that lead the churches. The people that are in the pews, who are the lifeblood of the church, have to inform the people who are leading the churches what the communities need from their perspective. It's important, especially when the person comes in from an area that's outside. They don't know the communities. So I know I have depended on people in my churches to teach me about the communities in which I've served. Yes, Renette.
I think we have to remember, I know when I started at my little church, I was told right up front that you are not a Matonian. You're a transplant. I mean, right out front, it was said. And I live 25 minutes away from Maytown. So it just seemed funny to me. But anyway, that was fine. But I think what is important is you can make really big changes in your churches. However, you have to, like you were saying, you can't do it, like you can't go in there with gangbusters. You have to realize that this is their heritage. You are an employee and this is their heritage, even though it's a calling for you. And then once they trust you and they realize that you're not going to come in there and totally discombobulate their church or their heritage, and that you're not going to be a thorn in the side of their town or their little area, they will trust you and you can make leaps and bounds changes and try new things, and they will go along with you. I know when I first started at my church, they all sat in the back, German Reforms, stoic. Soon as that postlude was played, they were out the door. But now I have to say to them, hey, I'm leaving, I'm going. And so who has a key to lock up? Because they just stay around. And I'm so thankful for that.
Yep.
It even dwindles out to I find them in the street talking and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So there is a special place in a little church.
Yes,
there really is. And there is a lot of good things that I went to in like this transition period. Before I was a pastor, I went to a different church than a UCC small church. I went to a very big church where you had to wear a name tag, and so that they would know you, and everything was in small groups. But there was something missing there for me. There was this camaraderie, this family orientation, and this helping your neighbor. Mm-hmm. that was not there. And I'm not criticizing a big church. That's not where I'm going, but I'm just emphasizing the beauty of a small church. And I think we all need to realize that, at least in Penn Central Conference, most of the churches are small, and that's okay. That's okay. But they're not dying. Just because you're small, they're not dying. That's such a misconception. There's a lot of beauty going on. And even if you have a small amount of people, look at the house churches. They were a small amount of people and they did fantastic work. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Renette. I appreciate that.
Ronette, I have to agree with you. We have, after church, they'll leave the sanctuary, but they go out into our social room and they are out there talking and talking and talking. And we keep saying, Jim and I keep saying, okay, bye, have a great week, and they're still, we leave and they're still there, and the other thing about a small church, our consistory president, one time we had our annual meeting and she said, we need to let this community know that this little church on the corner is alive and well. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the other thing. We need to let our communities know that we are there and we are there for them. And that, we are alive and well, even though we're small, we're still, we're thriving.
Well, and nobody here has talked about the challenges that some of our churches face. It's just not at the forefront of our mind. We know we don't have children. We know we have aging congregations. Some of us have older buildings. But everything that's been said on this screen is forward-looking. How can we use what we have? How can we maximize the gifts that we have? Now, nobody said that precisely, but that's what I heard in everything that we've said. Praying, meeting the needs of the congregation. I love, was Kathleen, was it you that said you're making snacks for the nursing homes? That's extraordinary. That's a unique one. Emily.
I know a couple weeks ago, our little church in Sacramento, PA, just had a celebration of Christian gifts that we did, and it was amazing. I mean, our church isn't that big, but we had a lot of people that had talents, singing or, crocheting or woodwork, poetry, any kind of things. And it was really kind of amazing to see what our little church can do, and I think sometimes people don't think of that. They just think, well, you're a little church. We still have a lot to give.
Precisely. I'm very proud of my little church right now. We have a member in a person in the extended family of one of our members who had a very severe stroke. And we did a love offering for them. And, money is not one of our strong points. We get by. I will say to you that they managed to do more than a weekly offering for this family. Because they care. And because they know how expensive it is to be sick.
I know the outreach that our church put forward 2.5 years ago for my family. Well, even before that, when my father passed away 7 years ago almost, the outpouring was really great. But then 2 years ago, when I had my lower left leg amputated, the prayers and the support and everything that I received, my family received, the people that were willing to, get my mom and my sister back and forth because they can't drive. For a small church, they really, really stepped up.
And nothing is to say that would not happen in a medium or larger sized church. Because a lot of times, in at least the statistical stuff that you read, really big churches are made up of groups of smaller gatherings where people are a little bit tighter. But thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
Can I say something real quick?
Sure.
On Sunday, we did a baptism in the river, and we usually sprinkle, but we did a baptism in the river. And because the family is the daughter that I baptized, her mother is so interconnected with STEM, and she teaches at a charter school and has been taught in Africa. We Zoomed everything, and we had people from all over the world Zooming in with us, which was like, I mean, here we are, this tiny little church in Maytown, and the African people were on with us. The church that that the mom and dad go to, because it's different from the church the daughter goes to, they're all Methodist. They were all zoomed on to support the daughter. It was amazing. So when you said about just having these connections, technology, I would have never thought before 2020 that this little church would have that kind of technology to do this kind of stuff. But now, today, I got some friend requests on Facebook from the people in Africa. So what a really cool thing. So I'm hoping that we can share things with them, all kinds of stuff with them, so that we have that connection too. So
Absolutely.
It was a blessing. Let me tell you, it was a blessing. It was cold as anything, but it was a blessing.
Cold and muddy, but wow.
Cold
what
and muddy.
incredible.
But incredible.
Yeah.
I said our congregation, they don't Zoom or they wouldn't have anything like that, but we record the service and we put it on our website and on Facebook. I'm sure some of you follow me that you've seen it. And I used to have people that I worked with, and one lady, she doesn't go to church. And she said, I saw you last night. I said, where? I was at home all night. She said, no, I watched your service. I watched your sermon. It was really good. I liked it, and I'm like, we're reaching people by that would never step foot in a church or don't feel comfortable or feel hurt by a church. We are reaching them even just by recording it and posting it on the website and on Facebook and on YouTube.
One of the joys of the Rural Coalition that I've encountered is learning about the different places where the people come from. We've had people from the far west, from Hawaii, from Maine, from the Northeast, from Florida, never California, never the Carolinas, but we've had from the Southern Conference. And there are some unique stories of things that are unique to these areas, but the connections and the familiarities that we've all shared on the screen are incredible. And to be able to learn from these people and learn about their communities and the way that they do the things that they do. And even though the Rural Coalition is made up of people from smaller areas, like, Ronette, you spoke about, Mayfield, right?
Maytown, Mayberry, Maytown, yeah.
No, I'm sorry, Maytown.
No, it is.
We are a fully digital community. Most of the people that come to the coalition have never been in the same physical space as the rest of us. When we go to General Synod next month, that will be the first time that some of us will ever be in the same physical space as some of the people we've been meeting with for 5 years. I can't wait. It's fun. I'm a geek. I like this kind of thing. Other comment, other question?
I think one of the things that we learn from a rural church is when they do gather as a community, they practice wonderful hospitality.
Yes.
And that was something that has been learned from generation to generation, and then they worry, how do we take that hospitality to our neighbors? Because at my church, we do a monthly breakfast 9 months out of 12. And every other month it goes to something special. Like we have tiger treats that feed the kids through school. We one of our breakfasts goes for that. And it's usually the special Saturdays that are designated that we get very busy. But Amelia was there about the ministry that just happens as people are just sitting in the room, eating breakfast and talking. So it's amazing what a little bit of connecting with the community does.
Not last month, but in the spring, I attended the University of Kentucky. I am in central Pennsylvania. We were eating breakfast in Richfield, Pennsylvania. And I always make sure I wear something that has UK on it so that I can nag the people who wear their Penn State stuff. And this man I did not know came up to me and said, "Did you go to the University of Kentucky?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And we got talking. Here he was an alum and had lived quite a bit of his life in Lexington. And we had to both be in central Pennsylvania in a very early morning in Richfield, sharing wonderful food. It's delicious, by the way. And we made a connection I never would have dreamed we could make. It's really cool. Janice, you put into your chat, I have had many people from many states and countries in my PAM, Pennsylvania Academy of Ministry classes. It was an amazing experience. I learned so much from them. And we do. When we ask people questions and then listen to their answers, we can learn so much. And we've got about 15 minutes yet. I want to watch our time. Any other questions or comments before we move on to the last couple? One of the realities, especially of smaller communities, is poverty. Poverty is expressed and is very real in many cities and towns around the world, and especially in our country. This book by Tick Mayer talks about how poverty affects rural communities in unique ways. Things like, you don't see people sleeping on grates. They don't sleep on the sidewalk. They couch surf. They sleep in cars. Poverty is expressed in job hopping, which happens in big towns. There's a lot of gig work that is actually originating in smaller towns where you can have some connectivity that you can do that kind of work. It is a real thing. Poverty also expresses in rural communities by the lack of access to healthcare, by lack of access to the legal system, by the lack of lawyers that can be afforded by some of these poorer communities. It's not a downer. These are real things that are part of our modern existence. This particular book is a bit of a slog to get through, but it is a fascinating look at how poverty is expressed in rural communities. It gives a whole different insight to somebody like me that came to communities like this as an adult. Now,
And
that's all my resources. Go ahead, Alice.
I was just going to say, I think we all realize, and kind of you've said that the poverty in rural America is quite often invisible. There's also a perception, when I grew up in Philadelphia, I thought anybody who had land, anybody who had grass, Kathy, anybody who had dirt, I thought they were wealthy. So that's another perception piece that people, from there's that dirt. But from the inside, from the outside looking in, there's an assumption that if you have land, you also have wealth, which is not always true. And that there's a whole long history of rural poverty that, has gone through generation to generation. So yeah, it's kind of something that we don't always realize, but is very much a part of our ministry.
And I appreciate what you just said for many reasons, but you used the word assumptions. One of the things that we have talked about in the Rural Coalition, and we've mentioned it on the screen tonight, we make assumptions where we don't have facts, where we don't have understanding. And I'm not saying this in a derogatory or pejorative way, but it's a way of processing things that we don't know. And when Alice raised the very real, what are the real differences between rural and urban communities? We do make assumptions about who and what a farmer is. We make assumptions about somebody who grows up in the middle of any big city, Philadelphia, DC, New York. We make assumptions because it's outside of our experiential knowledge. And one of the beauties of the coalition is learning from each other, and the hope that by bringing people together and listening to the stories and hearing the way things are done in different places, we can all learn more about our brothers and sisters in Christ. Because what we're talking about is how to be God's people in the places where we're planted. Whether that's downtown Philadelphia, whether that's Verdilla, whether that's New Berlin, whether that's in Maytown, Shiloh, Danville, Richfield, wherever we are. It's how do we be God's family, God's people in those places. This is the resolution that we are bringing to the General Synod. It is a very interesting resolution. If you're interested in reading such things, I encourage you to take a peek at that. That is the extent of my slides. You have been very, very talkative throughout the whole thing. Are there any other questions, discussions, or comments before we close our time together?
I think the one thing we haven't talked about is how our rural churches are really watching the money instead of practicing faith. I'm going to speak about my own church for that.
It's tough. It really is tough. a lot of these communities themselves are struggling financially, and that carries over. My church is the same way, in the sense that we have a nest egg and we have to hold on to it no matter what, because there's going to be a rainy day and we're going to need it for the rainy day. I used to serve.
Some of our older folks are children of the Great Depression.
Absolutely, and that's a very real thing.
Oh, very much so.
People who have lived through that. My son's grandmother still washed her aluminum and plastic wrap until she went in a nursing home. I see a hand. Who does it? Emily.
Emily.
You know, we were talking about the misconceptions of small churches versus large, you know, more urban churches. And I think some of the bigger, more urban churches sometimes think, well, the small churches don't have the same kind of problems that we do. They don't have the homelessness, they don't have the drug problems that we may have. And it's absolutely not true. I know in our area, you know, it's the same way. We have, you know, drug problems here. We have homeless. We're just able to, it's where everybody hides it. It's just more hidden. It's not quite in your face as it is in the cities. Because I know there's people, our local Walmart in Elizabethville, people live in their cars and you would never know it because they hide it well, because it's a very proud area, but it is a very real thing.
One of the things that I heard not too long ago, in the area where I am, we have a new Wawa and a new Rudders. The Rudders especially is, it's a sandwich shop like Sheetz, but Rudders is set up also to meet the needs of the trucking community. So they have showers. They have a bar. And some of the hidden homeless have figured out how to use those resources to better their lives and their children's lives in ways that they couldn't before an establishment like that existed. And there's already been, you know, pushback. What are those people doing here kind of situations? And I hope that the community and the churches can address some of that before it becomes nasty. Thank you. Anybody else? Comments, questions, concerns, ideas, wisdoms?
I think I would just like to encourage anyone, if they would have any good resources that they come upon, that maybe that you would share with Amelia so she could pass it on to the coalition, that we can add that to our website.
Yep. Thank you, Tammy. Yes, please. Then you can send me email instead of me sending you email all the time. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you being here tonight. I hope you took something away from this evening. We will send you the slides. I'll have Paul do that this coming week. I really appreciate everything that you shared and all of the wisdom that I heard on this screen. I thank you. Thank you very much. How about if we close in prayer? Gracious, holy, and loving God, you have brought us to this night. You have blessed us and given us the gift of life and presence and your spirit. I pray your blessing on each one on this screen this night. Pray for your community of faith in the world, that we would be your hands and your feet in a hurting world, and carry the flame of the Spirit and the light of your word wherever we go, and talk about it if we have to, but show it at all times. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. Y'all have a
Thank
good
you.
night.